How can we find God's presence in the midst of grief? That's the question we're going to be addressing today on Flourish-Meant. I'm your host, Tina Yeager. Flourish-Meant is sponsored by Access More. Today, I have the honor of welcoming a multi-Emmy Award-winning producer, and he is also founder of Five Stone Media, so he has several different resources to equip the body of Christ to reach out and watch God and help be part of that process of God's transformation of sorrow into hope. And now in the second segment, we're back with Steve Johnson, Emmy Award-winning producer and founder of Five Stone Media and author of God is Always With You, to talk about some practical things that you might be able to take away when you read God is Always With You, and maybe also through some of these other video projects and film projects that Steve has created through Five Stone Media. Steve, can you share with us some of the key things that you discovered in interviewing people about their stories, their personal experiences of sorrow, moving from there into hope that God brought them, being present with them in their time of grief?
Yeah, some of a very common story that we've heard from all of these people is that other Christians didn't know what to do with them, with what to do. So therefore, they didn't do anything. So they sit in silence, right? Churches or even well-meaning friends will say, well, maybe you don't have enough faith, or maybe you don't pray hard enough. Another common story. And so I think overall, as the body of Christ, we may not be equipped to know what to do about friends that are going through trauma. So we can be well-meaning, but oftentimes we just don't say anything because we don't know what to say, right? And sometimes we don't need to say anything. All we need to do is sit like Job's friends did. You just sit until they open their mouth, right? And then that's a whole nother story. But the first 7 days, they did a great job of just sitting.
I think that's true. And I think sometimes people want to fix it. They're uncomfortable with the sadness, and they say kind of the wrong things because it's not time to fix it. It's simply time to be present. And it's wonderful that God is present with us. How can we be more of Christ with skin on and be God's presence to people rather than trying to fix their sadness by saying all the wrong things?
Oh, man. By doing, by just starting, right? So if you've got a friend who is grieving, and that's the other thing, grieving is not the same for all of us, right? Everybody grieves different ways, different time frames. And what we tend to want to do is we want our friends to stop grieving because we care about them, right? We want them to get back to their normal life. And a lot of them never will. I mean, if you've lost a child, if you've had any traumatic loss, your life will never be the same again, right? But we want them to be the same just because we love them, So we have to have a better understanding of what grief is. And I'm not a therapist, so I have to learn this from the people that I hang out with. But there's no set timetable for grief. Some people grieve deeply for years. Some people are able to move not past it, but learn how to deal with it in their own way in maybe a little shorter time frame. I don't know if that answers your question. I don't remember what the question was at this point, but hopefully that helps.
Actually, I love the way that you responded to that, because that, as a therapist, is an important thing that I would like people to hear, is that we don't rush people through their grief or have specific expectations of what that grief should look like. Even within the same family, each family member may grieve differently. One person may be busy. Another person may be angry and irritable. Another person may just be very, very sad and just not moving and not thinking straight and not concentrating well. There's all different ways and different stages that we go in and out of, not in an exact straight line. So knowing that and not rushing people and saying, oh, you're not grieving well. And who are we to say they're not grieving well? I think that's kind of important to note. So thank you for bringing that up. You said by doing, we can respond to people well. What are some examples of ways that people found hope by others doing nice things for them that were actually helpful and not more counterproductive than helpful?
You know, a lot of parents that have lost children, they don't know what their next step in life is going to be. I mean, it's such an unimaginable loss for any of us. And what they appreciated the most was somebody just showing up at their doorstep and maybe dropping off a meal, or maybe just coming in and not saying anything, maybe dropping off a meal. Maybe it could be as simple as cleaning the house, bringing a team of cleaners over that, there's a lady in our area. She started this group called Hope Beyond the Grief group. And so nobody is in that group who hasn't had a tremendous loss in their life, but they all get each other. Okay. So they might do things like come over and do yard work for somebody, or come over and build a garden for somebody. And they don't ask, they see a need and they just get together because they all understand each other. And I think it's just a beautiful thing when you see that happening.
I love that you're talking about hope in the midst of grief. And that is a difficult concept, and people can get the right idea out of that. Obviously, immediately after a loss, you're not going to be all better or recovered. And like you said, people may never be the same. And especially if it's a loss of a child, you're never going to be the same after the loss of a child. But how do people, in your experience of interviewing those who've been through these tremendous grief and trauma experiences, how do they experience hope in the midst of something so devastating?
That's sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes you get to a point where you feel you've lost all hope, right? But if you can just find a little bit of hope through the encouragement, through a friendship, through reading the scriptures, then that's all you need is a little crack, right, of hope, and that can build on that. So we need to encourage each other. Scriptures are wonderful, but sometimes when you don't have hope, that's the last thing you want to do. Like, you can't, like, you physically can't pick up the Bible, because most of us say, well, that's where we go for hope. But sometimes you can't bring yourself to do that because you're grieving or you're hopeless. And so again, it comes from the body of Christ. I mean, it has to be us coming alongside each other to provide that hope. And then the healing begins.
And people sometimes feel angry. That's part of the grieving process. And that anger can be directed at God because it helps us feel less helpless when we're in the midst of a loss. And that's part of that natural response to something that really, in the original design of creation, there was not meant to be death. So it's something that's really painful for us. We weren't really designed for that. And God grieves with us when we grieve, even if we are expressing anger. Have you talked with people who've recognized that God can deal with their anger, that God can take their complaints, and God can hear them in the midst of their dark, ugly cry and still be with them in that? And that is that something people find hope in, just knowing that God is there?
Almost across the board, there's a period of I'm mad at God. Okay. Like, why does this happen? This shouldn't be happening to us. And I think some of it's just things we're taught in church maybe are not necessarily correct about our theology, right? But God made us. Like he can handle us being mad at him. One of the stories in the book is a lady named Margaret who grew up in the church and still goes to church and very much involved in the church, but she just has been afflicted with a deep depression much of her life. And the psychologists and psychiatrists have never been quite able to figure that out. She's attempted suicide many times. And she talks very much about that. Like, I've just been so mad at God, I throw things. I just am so angry, you know. I think it's okay. You know, if we, you know, again, God can handle that. If you look through the Bible stories, there's a lot of people in the Bible that have been angry at God and have wondered what's going on here.
Mm-hmm. And we can relate through the Psalms because there were many instances where David expressed very unholy and unsanctified feelings and emotions, and God can take that. He can totally take that. In fact, that I think is why God called David a man after his own heart, not because David was perfect, but because David poured out all the stuff into his relationship with God.
That's the Psalms are where you'll find every emotion. Okay. Mm-hmm. I think the Psalms are incredibly healing because you will find everything from joy and dancing to questioning where God is. It's a great book.
And so I am sure is the book that you have out now, God is Always With You. Tell people how they can get a copy of this book and stay connected with you and find all of the videos and films that you have provided through Five Stone Media and other sources.
Yep, all of fivestonemedia.com has a link to the book, but it has an overview of everything. But lifesupportresources.org is more of our trauma-based materials. There's about 200 videos on there that you can. And by the way, I just want to mention all of our video resources are free. Okay, we don't charge for any of that. All you have to do is register on the site, and you can have access to any of the stories that we have there.
I so appreciate the ministry that you have to people who desperately need hope, and they need someone to come alongside them and hear them and provide a lifeline. And that sounds like what you are really offering is just a connection to hope, a connection to tools, a connection to resources, a connection to other people's stories. And there's a healing power in the story of someone who's walked just a mile further than you and has still survived this grief, isn't there?
Yeah, story is powerful. And we all have a story. You could stop anybody on the street, and if you spend enough time with them, they have a story. And I never get tired of hearing people's stories. I just can't get enough of it.
Well, I hope that all of you listening have enjoyed this conversation with a curator and a publisher of stories in video and book format, Steve Johnson. I hope that you'll check out his resources and avail yourself of those and get a copy of God is Always With You. And of course, I also hope that you come back for the next episode of Flourish-Meant.